Does every story have an end? And the time for ours has come. The time has come to bring down the curtain on the series that brings back the most epic, fierce, wild, but above all, legendary rivalries in the world of Formula One. Here you witness the duel that broke the friendship between Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg, the open war between Alonso and Hamilton. The epic duel between Fernando and Sebastian Vettel, and the true gentleman's duel between Haken and Schumacher. And the battle between Lewis Hamilton and Sebastian Vettel. All of these, in one way or another, have been exciting rivalries, but just child's play compared to the mother of all battles. It's time to end this series on a high note, presenting to you the most legendary duel in the history of Formula One. The battle of two geniuses behind the wheel and two ambitious men who did whatever it took to achieve their goals. A duel where each one was not only seeking victory, but also to destroy the other driver. The epic duel between Ayrton Senna da Silva and Alain Prost, considered the greatest rivalry in the history of Formula One. Before starting this chapter, I'll mention this is the last episode after 4 seasons of direct battles between them. This last chapter will have 4 parts. We will be releasing them throughout the year so we don't say goodbye to the series so quickly. But without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the final chapter of legendary Formula One rivalries. Ayrton Senna versus Alain Prost. Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost, 2 names that I'm absolutely sure most fans of the big circus already know. Calling their rivalry legendary understates the intense tension, aggression, skill, and controversy they brought to their long battles. A battle where 2 of the best in history kept spectators on the edge of their seats from 1988 to 1993. Even with clashes they had before becoming teammates, which triggered what many know as the mother of all battles. But before that moment arrived, when becoming teammates turned them into the fiercest rivals in the history of the category, each of them had a story to tell. On one hand, we have Alain-Marie Pascal Prost, known by many as the Professor, and at that time, the greatest talent France had ever had in the history of motorsport. A driver who, on his way to Formula One, won many championships in lower categories. With a talent worthy of an opportunity in Formula One, winning the French Formula 3 and European Formula 3 Cups, which led McLaren, amazed by his talent, to give him his first opportunity in the top category in 1980. However, his initial time at McLaren was brief. Just 1 year before moving from 1981 to 1983 to drive for the brand from his country, Renault. He achieved his first Formula One victories with the French team. And in addition to this, in 1983, he competed for the first time for the World Drivers' Championship but ended up losing to Nelson Piquet. However, that stage would end with Prost blaming his team and his car for not being competitive enough. Ultimately, Renault fired him, prompting the Frenchman to return to McLaren for a second stint. One that would make him a legend. He would lose the 1984 title to Niki Lauda. But after 5 seasons involved in Formula One in '85, he would become Formula One World Champion for the first time, repeating the feat in the epic 1986 season, snatching the title from the men of the Williams team. At this point in his story, Prost was not only considered one of the fastest men on the grid, but also an intelligent man both on and off the track, becoming the leader of the McLaren team, without knowing that soon someone would arrive to destroy everything he had built in 4 seasons. A Brazilian with abundant talent named Ayrton Senna da Silva, a young man destined from a very young age to be a motorsport superstar. After winning every junior category he entered, he caught Formula One's attention and debuted with Toleman in 1984. A modest team that wasn't a contender for podiums or victories, and yet Senna somehow managed to take them to the winner's podium 3 times. His impressive performance got him a chance with a better team like Lotus. Despite winning and contending for the title in 1986, his car was still inferior to the Williams and Alain Prost's McLaren. This meant that despite his talent, he couldn't claim the greatest prize for a top-tier driver. However, by 1988, his life would completely change direction. In '87, Lotus was powered by Honda, and Senna developed a strong relationship with them. And by '88, the Japanese would go on to power McLaren. And precisely this team was looking for a driver to partner with Prost Honda. He was nominated because they understood each other well, but still had to win the seat over Nelson Piquet. But interestingly, when Prost was asked if he wanted him or Nelson as his teammate, he chose Ayrton Senna, which made the Senna and Prost duo officially come together in 1988. But in addition to this, McLaren had designed a monstrous single-seater designed by Gordon Murray and powered by Honda. They were about to dominate Formula One without any kind of opposition. But, unknowingly, they were about to join the most legendary battle in Formula One history. Senna had a golden chance to achieve his dream of becoming world champion, while Prost aimed to stay leader of the legendary British team. 1988 marked the start of this rivalry with the first stage set in Senna's home country, Brazil, a venue for the World Championship's first round and the start of a battle that would forever change Ayrton Senna da Silva's life. And what about Prost? Carapagua marked the official start of the Senna-Prost rivalry as teammates. At this Grand Prix, McLaren proved in practice their car was unbeatable, and where they could win each and every race that year. Senna secured pole position at the inaugural Grand Prix, finishing half a second ahead of Nigel Mansell and Prost, positioning himself excellently to get his first victory at home and the first of the season, without knowing that this Grand Prix was about to turn into a nightmare for him. During the formation lap, Senna discovered his gear selector was broken, preventing him from competing in the Brazilian Grand Prix. So he had to go into the pits to use the spare car, forced to continue the race from last place. This left Prost in second place at the start, and if he could get past Mansell's car, he would have a very good chance of winning the first Grand Prix of the year. Prost took the lead in just one corner. Gradually, he created a huge gap between himself and his pursuers. Senna gradually overtook drivers one by one in his powerful car, aiming to minimize the damage from the reliability issue. Even though he was fired up, leading his people and aiming for a great result, he would soon realize his effort was useless and in vain. By lap 20, Senna was already in second place, making a heroic comeback in his homeland. However, remember, Senna had to switch to the spare car before the Grand Prix started. He switched during the formation lap under the green flag, which was prohibited by the regulations. That's why Senna was shown the black flag and was disqualified from the race. If Prost had no issues, he could win the first race with his teammate out and deal an early blow to his new rival at home, which he did by crossing the finish line on lap 60, taking the first victory of the year and winning the first duel between them on enemy territory. However, luck evened out at the next Grand Prix in San Marino, as this time Prost encountered problems. This allowed Senna to win his first McLaren race at that Grand Prix, while the Frenchman finished second. The Grand Prix had passed, but now it was time to race in the Jewel of the Crown. After the 1-1, it was time to decide the tie in Monaco, a crucial match for both teams. Senna was at one of his best circuits, where he amazed the world in 1984 with a brilliant rain-soaked race, and Prost in a race he could consider a home race. Whoever took the victory would make a strong statement in this particular battle. Senna made his intention to win clear by taking pole position, a second and a half faster than the time set by his teammate Alain Prost. A perfect lap made a huge difference in the records, so what? What if he finished it in the race? It would be a tough psychological blow. Senna defended first place well, but Prost had a poor start and was quickly passed by Gerhard Berger's Ferrari. A serious mistake, as Senna created a huge gap over the two drivers behind him for half the Grand Prix. Prost was losing a lot of time by not being able to overtake him on a circuit where it's not easy at all. Prost overtook Berger on lap 54 with under 30 laps remaining. Despite Prost's speed, closing the nearly 1-minute gap the Brazilian had built during the Grand Prix seemed impossible. Everything was going as planned. A dominant win for Senna until 16 laps remained. Senna had crashed at the sports curve. All caused by a lapse in concentration, a very serious one, with the race practically won. And he ended up retiring from that Monaco Grand Prix because of something that was entirely his fault. Twice as costly because it would be Prost who ended up inheriting the victory. And despite that mistake at the start, he did what Senna couldn't. He took his car to the finish line and put the scoreboard at 2-1 in his favor in the victory count. Prost would win again in Mexico in the next round, leaving things at a particular 3-1 between the two. And in the drivers' standings, Prost was leading with 33 points and Senna was third with 15. A good initial advantage in these first races of the year. But this season, with McLaren's car advantage, the Brazilian could still recover. But we'll explain why later, since a few weeks later, it was time to race in Canada. As had become usual that season, Senna took pole position for that Grand Prix. And the Brazilian couldn't allow Prost to take another victory and widen the gap in their personal scoreboard. Winning in Canada was a top priority, and obviously Prost, on a winning streak, wanted to put more distance between himself and Senna. Who would win this battle in Canada? Only time would tell. Once again, Senna had failed at the start and would be overtaken by Alain. Alain quickly got to work, looking to put some distance between himself and his teammate. But despite the Frenchman's efforts, Senna would never let him get away. And even though in those first laps he didn't have a clear spot to attack, the Brazilian was patient, waiting for an opportunity. Senna didn't give the Frenchman any room to breathe. He knew he needed that victory and wasn't going to let anything get in the way. For 19 laps, Senna had been hunting Prost. On that lap, he seizes an opportunity, comes out just behind the rival McLaren, and waits for his chance. Senna had taken the lead from Prost in an aggressive move, very much his style. The roles were reversed. Now the Frenchman was the pursuer and had to try to regain his position by doing the same to Senna. However, although he stayed close to the Brazilian's car for a few laps, he couldn't maintain the pace. That day, Senna's pace was simply demonic. Alain Prost tried his best, but he just couldn't make it. In Canada, on lap 60, Senna crossed the finish line first to win the Canadian Grand Prix, leaving the score between the two at 3 wins for Prost and 2 wins for Ayrton. A few weeks later, Senna also won the United States East Grand Prix, dominating the event. And although the score was 3-3 in victories in the first rounds of the World Championship, in points the advantage was in favor of Alain. He was in first place with 45 points and Senna was second with 33. But, as I told you, in this particular year, the victories achieved by each driver mattered a lot. You might be wondering why, but don't get anxious. Uncle Skyline Racing will explain it to you at the right time. For now, I just want you to keep that in mind. Despite the advantage in the standings, for Prost, things were really even between the two. At this point, only McLaren had a chance to win. The next duel between these motorsport geniuses would be at Alain Prost's home track, the Paul Ricard circuit in Le Castellet. A Grand Prix where Senna wanted revenge for that race in Brazil that his rival had won. It would also benefit him to defeat his rival at home and deliver a strong moral blow. Two-time world champion Alain Prost on his side. He wanted not only to win in front of his people, but also to reverse Senna's positive momentum and add another victory to his personal record. He showed his clear intentions by taking pole position from Senna. For the first time that year, the Brazilian would be beaten in qualifying. That was just a sign of another titanic battle coming between the two. Thank you. Prost refused to give Senna room and strongly defended his lead at the start. The Brazilian, despite having to fight for second place, would manage to hold on. for now trying to put pressure on his rival to go for the lead in these opening laps. However, even though Senna kept a good distance from Prost, Prost didn't give him any chance or opportunity to attack and threaten his lead. Until Senna gets his chance during the pit stop window, as the Brazilian pits before Prost, to change tires in the pits, making a normal stop and getting out as quickly as possible to make the undercut work. Prost waited 3 more laps before making his stop. Also, when his team changed his tires, his stop was somewhat slow. This would allow Senna to take the lead of the Grand Prix, making the undercut maneuver quite effective. However, luck was on the Frenchman's side that day, since a group of backmarkers would slow down Senna when he was chasing him to regain the lead. And besides, the driver of car number 12 would start to suffer a problem with his gearbox. 2 factors enabled Prost to come close to regaining victory. So when he sees the opportunity in front of him, he simply and straightforwardly goes for it. With that beautiful maneuver, and taking advantage of all the problems Senna was having, Prost regains the lead on his home turf. Senna refused to settle. Surprised by the maneuver, he wanted to retake the lead, but the problems he was having with the gearbox would be a big setback for him. And although for a few laps he was there fighting for the victory, in the end he had to give up. Alain accelerated and Senna couldn't respond with his damaged car. So when lap 80 came, Prost finished a brutal weekend for himself and in front of his people. He managed to get the victory again and add another one to his personal tally. This win showed his authority and boosted his morale. Prost had more wins than Senna, led the drivers' standings, and things looked good for him. However, things would gradually take a dark turn. In the next Grand Prix in Great Britain, Senna dominated in the rain, winning as Prost retired because his car was unmanageable. A few weeks later, the Brazilian again scored a decisive win at the German Grand Prix. Momentum shifted several times in the 1988 season, and after the German Grand Prix, Prost still led the World Drivers' Championship. He had a 3-point lead over his rival, but his concern was the number of victories, since Senna had turned it around. Now, he had 5, the Frenchman 4. And yes, I know you want to know why it's so important to get victories this season, but believe me, it's not the time to explain it yet. I have a reason, so please just be patient. Prost was in a tough situation and needed to settle the score with Senna. Was the World Championship in Hungary becoming more difficult for him? Hungary is known by many as the go-kart track of Formula 1 because of its size, layout, and its combination of corners. Would this go-kart track witness a new chapter in the legendary Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost rivalry from that season? However, in that race's qualifying session, things started poorly for the 2-time world champion. Ayrton Senna once again secured pole position and would start the Hungarian Grand Prix from the front. But Prost had a bad moment and a poor qualifying session on a circuit where overtaking is difficult. It was not a good omen particularly. But points are only awarded on Sundays, and both Senna and Prost had a lot of work to do. Senna made an excellent start, leaving his rivals no chance. For his part, Prost had a bad start and had no choice but to deal with it. But he would quickly start overtaking his rivals, hoping to catch up to Senna and prevent his 6th victory of the season. As Prost regained positions by overtaking others, Senna defended his lead from Nigel Mansell's Williams. But things would get much easier for him when Mansell spun while battling with him, leaving Ayrton alone, while his teammate kept overtaking rivals one after another. By lap 47 of the Hungarian Grand Prix, Prost overtook Thierry Boutsen, the last obstacle he had before rejoining the fight, a one-on-one against Senna. Prost had managed to come back from 9th place and put himself within reach of a chance to win this Grand Prix as the Frenchman quickly started putting pressure on Senna, and in just a few laps he was glued to his rear wing. The Professor and the Virtuoso were once again competing for a Grand Prix win. But only a few laps after overtaking Thierry Boutsen, the battle intensified. The cars closed in, giving Prost a great chance to attack as Senna was evenly matched. He sees an opportunity on the main straight and goes for it, and he was this close to pulling off the incredible feat of overtaking 4 moving cars. He overshoots the brakes and tries to cut in, but Senna miraculously keeps first place. Obviously, Prost wouldn't give up, and with only a few laps left, he kept pushing, trying to break through the Brazilian defense. But he simply didn't give him another opportunity like the one he had in previous laps. And without giving in to the pressure, with half a second between them, Senna held on, won the Hungarian Grand Prix, and the score of victories was 6-4 in favor of the Brazilian. They gave us a beautiful battle, where Senna was the winner. At this point, Ayrton had a streak of 3 consecutive victories. He was in sublime form, and not giving in to the pressure from his rival. Prost was being beaten by his teammate, but inside his head, a small doubt would begin to arise. He wondered if the team was favoring Ayrton Senna. At this particular point, Prost was beginning to suspect that his engine supplier Honda was favoring Ayrton Senna, thanks to their strong relationship since 1987. You probably think Prost was just making excuses in response to his teammates' performance. How can I explain this? He had reasons to be suspicious. In that year, 1987, Senna and Honda formed a very strong alliance. The Japanese work ethic aligned perfectly with the natural dedication that Ayrton Senna had always shown. Therefore, the Japanese collaborated closely with the Brazilian, something Alain would eventually notice. He first noticed more engineers were working on his teammate's engine than on his own. In fact, Honda saw Senna as a samurai and Prost as a computer, from their perspective. That's the source of the favoritism they were accused of and openly displayed. Even Jean-Marie Balestre, then president of Fédération Internationale du Sport Automobile, now Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, was involved. He publicly asked the engine supplier to provide both Senna and Prost with the same power units and the same technology. But he also had another internal issue to handle. Senna sometimes had the habit of copying his teammates' car setup, feeling quite comfortable with the adjustments that the Frenchman used in the Grand Prix. He discovered this in Brazil during the year's first race, when he had to use the spare car. Was set up for Prost. Having this suspicion, Prost tried to set a trap for Senna at the next Belgian Grand Prix, since before that Grand Prix, Prost made the decision to change the setup, by removing a bit of wing to gain more straight-line speed and thus catch Senna by surprise. A trap that backfired on him, since throughout that entire Belgian Grand Prix, he had problems with the balance of his car. Senna, who kept the original setup, won the Grand Prix, finishing 30 seconds ahead of his teammate. A win raised the score to 7-4, a tough setback for the INN since only 3 points separated them in the drivers' standings. I told you that the victories each one achieved that year mattered a lot. But the time to explain why that is hasn't come yet. For McLaren, this was a fascinating Grand Prix. Another 1-2 finish by their drivers, who at that time had made the British team secure the Constructors' title. Now more than ever, Prost had to stop Senna from winning again that season. However, at the Italian Grand Prix, both cars would retire, and for the first and only time that year, McLaren would not win a Grand Prix due to this retirement. But this double knockout gave Senna the chance to get closer to the driver's title, with only 4 races left to finish the season. He couldn't allow, for anything in the world, for Brazil to go with an 8-4 score in the next Grand Prix of the season. If that happened, the title, which already seemed difficult, would become nearly impossible. That's why the Portuguese Grand Prix was now or never for the 2-time world champion. He had to go for that victory, but he wasn't willing to give up without fighting until the very end. Thank you. Prost would win the Portuguese Grand Prix, prolonging his life in the fight for this world championship. But this battle had left Prost particularly upset with Senna since the Brazilian dangerously squeezed him on the main straight during their fight in this race. That attitude really bothered the Frenchman, who said he wasn't surprised by his teammates' behavior. Senna also spoke out, saying he didn't understand Prost's anger since Prost had pushed him onto the grass in the opening laps of the Portuguese Grand Prix. Whatever happened, the victory belonged to Prost and he was still alive in the fight for the World Drivers' Championship. And in Spain, he repeated his win, while his teammate again finished fourth, missing the podium. And this created an interesting situation. In the drivers' standings, Prost led with 90 points while Senna was second with 79. Do you remember this video? I really emphasized the importance of the season's victories, even though Prost led the world drivers' standings with a solid advantage. If Senna won the next Japanese Grand Prix, he would be the world champion with one race left to run at the Australian Grand Prix. You might be wondering, how is this even possible? Considering Prost's position, as standings leader, he was over 9 points ahead, the value of a win. How is it possible then that if Senna won that Grand Prix, he would be the world champion? Well, it's time to explain to you why I mentioned so many times that it was important to get victories that season. 1988. That year, a regulation came into effect. Strange. You'll see. They decided to use a point system for that season, based on discarding. This may be complicated to explain, and honestly I don't fully understand it, but I'll do my best to explain. That year, Formula 1 held 16 Grand Prix races. Of the 16 Grand Prix races, only the 11 best results counted, with the 5 worst discarded. After Prost won the Spanish Grand Prix, 5. Senna's results to be dropped included his disqualification in Brazil, retirements in Monaco and Italy, and 4th and 6th places in Portugal and Spain, leaving him with 75 valid points at that time. Prost had 6 wins while he had 5. His worst results were the retirements in Italy and Great Britain and 3 of his second places, leaving him with 72 valid points up to that moment. Therefore, with this points system based on discards, the virtual leader of the world drivers' standings was Ayrton Senna. Therefore, the match ball was in his favor for this penultimate Grand Prix of the year. Because if he won the Japanese Grand Prix, with only one Grand Prix left to compete in Australia, he would take his points tally to 84. And even if Prost finished second in that Grand Prix, he would have a total of 78 points, making him champion. Even if Senna retired from the last race, he would still have 87 valid points, as that result would be discarded, and Prost could only tie with 87 points by winning in Australia. But thanks to the tiebreaker rule, the Brazilian would be champion for having achieved 8 victories, while the Frenchman only had 7. See if this explanation gave you an embolism or if your brain is frying like mine. For practical purposes, if Senna won in Japan, he would be world champion. If Prost won, the championship would be decided at the Australian Grand Prix. We had reached that all-or-nothing point, the moment when the virtuoso and the professor would fight for that World Drivers' Championship. He sought his first crown and the dream he chased since childhood. And the third World Championship would elevate him further in this category's history. A head-to-head duel, machinery, 2 geniuses behind the wheel. In a Japanese temple that was about to decide the fulfillment of a dream or a world championship that would go into overtime. (1988) saw legendary battles between Senna and Alain Prost. We were in the final stretch, 2 races that would determine the fate of that season, starting with the Japanese Grand Prix. Victory was a must for both of them. If Senna won, he'd clinch the title. If Prost won, the championship would go to a final showdown between them. We reached the point where both had a lot to gain and a lot to lose going into this Japanese round. Senna, as was typical that season, again took pole position. This was 3/10 faster than Alain Prost's time, a crucial result in the quest for the World Championship. The stage was set. Senna would start from the best position and Prost would have to be aggressive to go for the win. Both would give their all over 51 laps to fight for victory. Once the cars lined up on the grid, it became an all-or-nothing battle. Would begin between the two. things would quickly get complicated for Senna. His car would stall at the start of the race. Although thanks to the fact that the grid is on a slope, he was able to get the car going again, but dropped all the way down to 14th place. Prost, meanwhile, had a perfect start, just what he needed then. Senna's situation was now complicated. He needed to pass 14 drivers to win the Formula One World Championship, and Prost only had to hold his position as the leader of the Grand Prix. The task wouldn't be easy at all for Ayrton Senna, but nothing more. By the end of lap number 1, he had already overtaken 6 drivers to move up to 8th on the grid. He had the best car and had to overtake all the drivers before Prost got further ahead, and it became impossible to win. And that's it. After 4 laps, Senna was already in 4th place. An incredible charge, but it couldn't stop there. It's just that despite his bad luck at the start, luck was on his side that day, because his rival would have problems with his gearbox. And in fact, he was being heavily pressured by Ivan Capetti's March, who almost overtook him and snatched the lead, taking advantage of that failure of the French car. Prost was really struggling. Senna was hunting him down lap after lap, and he had to try to hold on with the gearbox failing. As if that weren't enough, light rain began falling on the track, which would make driving harder, and where this only benefited Ayrton Senna. Just 3 laps after Capelli's attempt to lead, Senna had caught up to the back markers. He had achieved the feat. Resources were scarce, and he now had his big chance to win and claim the title. Exploiting Capelli's injury, he became an obstacle the Brazilian had to overcome. The thing is that the Auto March would not be an opponent for Senna since it had to retire due to reliability problems, leaving a direct head-to-head between the two for the World Drivers' Championship title. Capelli retired on lap 20. Senna would have more than half the race to overtake his teammate, and Prost would be in the same position, but to defend himself heroically with the car in the condition he had it in, which he was doing at first. But on lap 27, both of them would have to deal with the traffic of the back markers. And when the Frenchman tries to get past the Cesaris, Nakajima and Gugelmin, that's when the opportunity opens up. That Senna had been looking for. 27 laps. After that disastrous start and having overtaken 14 drivers, Senna was the new leader of the Japanese Grand Prix. As I said, Prost had to win or lose his title chances. But no matter how much he pushed, no matter how much he pressured his rival, that gearbox issue was a complete burden. Despite his effort and intentions, he had to watch as, little by little, his shot at a 3rd World Championship slipped away. This was especially painful for him, as he had been more consistent than Senna all season. He was the leader of the World Championship, and yet he was about to lose against Ayrton Senna, a Senna who, when he had to be decisive, was. He may not have been as consistent as Prost, but he was definitely more of a winner. And in this season, with that point system based on discards, getting victories, as I told you, was absolutely essential. From this point, Senna began setting fastest laps, pulling away from Prost and ending his remaining chances to win the title. And when lap 51 came, the checkered flag fell with Senna crossing the finish line first. And for the first time, the Brazilian was Formula One World Champion. Ayrton Senna da Silva had the World Drivers' Championship in his hands. That dream finally came true. Without knowing that the intensity of the battles he would have from now on with Alain Prost would only increase and soon become a hell for him and his teammate.